Welcome to Ladies Who Jazz, where each month I'll be featuring and interviewing a different female jazz musician. Today we have Emma Alabaster, who plays upright bass. Emma, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, where are you currently based and how did you get started on jazz? Are you formally trained or self-taught or a little bit of both?
So I'm based here in New York City. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and I live in Staten Island now. And I grew up on jazz in a way. My father is a drummer, and he plays some piano, and I grew up singing. I grew up singing standards with my father. Well, I went to LaGuardia High School, which is a public arts school, and I was a vocal major there. And I would say that LaGuardia was where I found jazz kind of for myself and not just something that my father did that I did with him sometimes. There was one jazz studies class, and I got myself into that class. And it was vocal majors and instrumental majors, which was kind of a rare situation. It was basically like this. Most of the instrumental majors were men, and they would sit at the front of the classroom, and they knew a lot about jazz, and a lot of them were already playing jazz. And most of the vocal majors were women, and they would sit towards the back of the classroom and didn't really know very much about jazz. And I basically stationed myself in between them. And it was kind of a stressful situation for me, but it also was very exciting. And I began going across the street to the Performing Arts Library and taking out all of these jazz CDs and just getting really into it. And it was through that class that I decided I wanted to play the bass. I was just really drawn to the instrument, and I felt like it would be the opposite of being a singer in a way, that I would be able to be in a supportive role rather than being out front, that I would get on kind of the low end of the music rather than just singing up top. And there was just something about the instrument that really drew me in. And I think I also was attracted to it because I didn't see a lot of women playing it. For my 18th birthday, I got my first upright bass of my own, and then I went to college. I thought it was kind of too late for me to be serious about the bass, but it wasn't. I was a music major in college, and I studied in the jazz program, and that was my formal training, I suppose. Yeah.
Wow, that is so cool. I had no idea. How do you think jazz has influenced your playing and your original compositions?
Currently, I'm not playing as much straight ahead jazz, but I would say that jazz deeply influences my sensibilities as an artist and always will. The spirit of improvisation, even when I'm playing music that isn't improvised, just the way that you have to be present and creative and connected to the music is something that I feel like I learned from playing jazz that is kind of crucial to me as a musician and as an artist.
What challenges have you faced, if any, in terms of continuing to do what you do, and how have you overcome them?
One challenge has to do with being a woman in jazz. When I did study jazz in college, I was the only woman in a lot of my classes, and definitely the only female instrumentalist. And, in many ways, that was fine. I have a lot of great friends. I made great relationships and musical relationships with my colleagues in that program. And in other ways, I think especially once I left, I realized there were ways that it was really hard for me, and that I felt like even in a liberal arts school that isn't the most kind of bro-y atmosphere, there were still ways that I felt like I couldn't be my full self. Even things like, I'm really interested in writing music that it tells stories, that is about my life, that is about the world around me, that is about seeking justice in different ways. And there were ways that I felt like there were musicians that I was working with that we could connect maybe musically, but then when it came to the content of what I was working on, I didn't feel like we could always connect. And then when I graduated college, I was playing less and less kind of straight ahead jazz and more in, I guess, what you would call the creative and improvised music scene in New York, which in some ways was very exciting, and in other ways had a lot of the same problems. I've had to find my own way, find my own people. I met you, Lisa, at Willie Mae Rock and Roll Camp for Girls, and that was the first time that I started working there when I was still in college, and it was the first time that I had really met other women musicians, and meeting you and other folks who played jazz was kind of mind-blowing for me. And also being at a place like Rock Camp that a jazz camp, but it's very much about people being able to express themselves wherever they're at and whatever skills and technical abilities they have. And that was really freeing for me as well. I think part of what has happened with jazz being something that is kind of preserved in the academy is that it also, in some ways, the ways that jazz used to be sort of an apprenticeship model and something that wasn't necessarily about memorizing all the solos and doing all the transcriptions, but really just about playing together and innovating together. I think that's something that in some ways has been lost. For me, I'm still on my journey of figuring out what kind of music I want to be making. And again, I feel like jazz is the thing actually that taught me that I get to make my own rules. And even if I'm not playing things that will be considered jazz right now, I don't think that for me is what's important.
Tell me, who is the greatest jazz musician who has influenced you and who has really who touched you and really just made you have this aha moment of like, oh my God, I've got to play now?
It started for me with the singers, and that's always there, even when I'm just playing bass. I think for me, a connection to the story and the lyric and the lyricism and the melodic idea is really important to me. I think Ella Fitzgerald was my first love, and then later Sarah Vaughan and Carmen McRae, and just a lot of amazing singers. And when I first started getting into jazz, I think Thelonious Monk kind of blew my mind. The first bass line I remember ever learning was a Ray Brown bass line off of an Oscar Peterson, Milt Jackson, Ray Brown album. Very Tall is the name of the album, and it was on Green Dolphin Street. And that bass line was the first thing I remember learning. I remember hearing that Ray Brown bass line and being like, that is just so cool. Paul Chambers is someone that is really great for listening to in terms of just really clear bass lines. Charlie Hayden is a real love of mine. I got into Ornette Coleman's music in a big way. I remember the first time that I ever listened to the science fiction sessions. That's another moment that I will always remember.
What are you doing presently, and what do you have coming up?
I work with a poet and songwriter named Cornelius Eady, and recently brought you, Lisa, into the fold of that band. Cornelius has a band called Rough Magic, Cornelius Eady and Rough Magic, and I'm really proud of that project. I think it's a really powerful thing. We are releasing an album probably in the spring of the poet Sterling Brown, who was kind of a contemporary of Langston Hughes but stayed in the South. Cornelius often talks about him as the poet laureate of Jim Crow, and Cornelius composed music around a bunch of his poems. And so, as you know, we've been recording that project, and that's going to be coming out soon. So that's something to look out for, and some shows around that. I have a duo project with drummer composer Leo Ferguson called Decibelists that is not out in the world yet. We've been recording an album, and you will be hearing from us very shortly.
Now we're going to get to the sharing portion of the interview. What's a lick or a musical concept or idea that you can share with the audience?
Here's something I love, and maybe I'll do it in the song. I love a good pedal tone. Hanging out as a bass player, hanging out on one note as some of the harmony changes over it to create kind of tension and suspension, and then that moment of release when you move out of the pedal tone. That's something that I really, really love.
What advice can you give to the girls and women out there who would like to start playing jazz?
Not to be cliche, but I would say you can do anything you want to do. You can make it your own way. Don't be worried about what you're supposed to do or what you're supposed to play or how you're supposed to sound or having all the chops in the world. I think, again, for me, the spirit of jazz that I believe in is one that's about self-expression and experimentation, and that it's crucial that women and girls are doing that very thing.
That is so well put. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. All right, so we're ready to go downstairs and play a tune. For the audience out there, if you've enjoyed this interview and want to see other ladies who jazz, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you are a lady who plays jazz or know of someone who does and would like to see them featured on this show, you can contact me here on YouTube or on my website. I'm Lisa Liu. This is Emma Alabaster. Keep shedding.